Hi guys, this is a slightly different video from normal in that it's to apologise that there's one topic that I keep getting asked to talk about that I can't really say an awful lot about. And I'm holding a French sabre which is more or less irrelevant to the topic because what I get asked to talk about is Polish sabres. Okay, so there is a few things I can say about Polish sabres. There are various different types of Polish sabre. Certain types of Polish sabre are very similar to types of Hungarian sabre. The use of the sabre in Poland was very important, going all the way back to the 15th century, I would say, approximately. I do actually have a Polish book on Polish sabres written in Polish, but I can't read Polish, so I can only look at the pictures and look at the dates, and I can say that there were types of sabre in use in Poland and surrounding countries, obviously Hungary and parts of Bohemia and Lithuania and so on, in the medieval period. And by the 16th century they were very important type of sword in that part of Europe, of Central and Eastern Europe. And of course with the invasion of the Turks and the influence of Turkish styles of equipment and warfare and so on, and copying certain aspects of Turkish weapons, sabres became even more important. And the sabre of Eastern Europe was really what influenced the sabre of Western Europe. So in the 18th century, by and large in Western Europe, we were using mostly straight swords until about the middle of the 18th century, and then around the middle of the 18th century, sabres inspired by Austro-Hungarian and Polish and other Eastern European models and types started to become really popular in Western Europe, such that by the 19th century in Western Europe, sabres were pretty much universal for sort of 90% of all Western European cavalry. And incidentally, this also influenced the style of light cavalry uniforms. The hussars uniforms of Britain and France and Spain and Italy were essentially inspired by, I won't say copied, but inspired by Polish and Hungarian sort of models. And the Polish sabre was, and still is, a very influential and important part of Polish culture and history. And in terms of the use of the sabre, this is really the point I'm sort of working around to. It's a very interesting topic, and I hope to do an interview with a friend of mine, colleague of mine, known as Daria Izdebska, from a group up in Scotland, the Academy of Historical Arts, AHA, and she and many other people in the world, like Richard Marsden in the States, are working on trying to reconstruct Polish sabre method. And there are no treatises, there are no manuals for the use of the old Polish sabre. That's the first thing to say. However, from the 1830s and a bit later in the 19th century, there are sources that describe possible ways that the old Polish sabre, i.e. the sort of 16th, 17th century Polish sabre, was perhaps used. And there's this expression which comes up in a lot of sources, not just Polish sources, but from the rest of Europe, that describe the use of the Polish sabre as being that of the cross-cutting art. And this is a term that comes up repeatedly in various sources. And it's an interesting thing. There are bits of material out there that people are working on to try and triangulate, to use a term that I like as I've explained in previous videos, to try and triangulate an impression of what Polish sabre fighting was really like. And it does seem that it was probably quite different to how sabres were used in Western Europe later on. And equally probably quite different to how side swords and broadswords were used in Britain or Italy or other parts of Europe. It does seem it was a distinct fighting style for using the curved sword of Poland. Last thing I would say on the matter is that I personally think, for the people looking at trying to reconstruct Polish sabre fighting, that it would be very worthwhile obviously delving into try and find if there are any more Polish sources that are as yet undiscovered, but also looking at Russian sources, because in my own sort of cursive, superficial looking at Russian sources of the 19th century, I can already see, particularly from a Russian source from 1843, that there seems to have been, in Russia at least, a distinctive way of using the curved sabre, as opposed to the way that they used the straight palash, or straight sabre as some people would call it, but straight palash as I would call it, and the broadsword essentially. And that's very interesting, because in Western Europe, generally speaking, the curved sabre was used in basically exactly the same way as the backsword, the broadsword and the straight palash, whereas it seems like in this Russian source they had distinct ways of using the curved sabre as opposed to the straight broadsword or backsword. So maybe there's stuff to look at in the Russian sources to bring in there as well, because potentially Russian sabre might have some relationship with Polish sabre use. But there we go. So please stop asking me to talk a lot about Polish sabre use, because I don't know an awful lot about Polish sabres, and I don't know an awful lot about Polish sabre fencing, and the people who know the most about Polish sabre fencing are only reconstructing it based on a few sources. But I will, when possible, I promise, try to get an interview with Daria or other people who are working on Polish sabre sources, because it is a very interesting topic and beautiful weapons. Cheers.